I am proud to create him Prince of Wales, Tywysog Cymru, the country whose title I've been so greatly privileged to bear during so much of my life and duty.
Something shifted inside Buckingham Palace recently, and it did not arrive with a press release or a carefully worded statement from royal communications. It arrived the way the most consequential decisions inside the British monarchy have always arrived quietly, deliberately, and wrapped in the language of objects rather than words. King Charles III has reportedly made the decision to transfer a significant portion of Queen Camilla's personal diamond brooch collection into the custody of Catherine, Princess of Wales. The move, described by sources close to the palace as both carefully considered and months in the making, has sent a current of tension through the royal household that insiders say has not been felt so strongly in years. This is not a story about jewelry. This is a story about power, precedent, and the quiet but unmistakable way that a monarchy signals what it believes the future looks like. To understand why this reported decision carries the significance it does, you first need to understand how royal institutions communicate the things they are not willing to say in public. The British monarchy has, for centuries, used objects, crowns, robes, scepters, and yes, brooches as a form of language. These are not accessories chosen for personal taste on a given morning. They are deliberate selections made within a system where every visible choice carries institutional meaning. A brooch worn at a state occasion is not simply beautiful. It is a statement about the person wearing it, about their standing within the family, and about the message the palace wishes to send to anyone watching. Queen Camilla's diamond brooch collection became part of this language over the course of her years as queen consort and then as queen. Pieces from the collection appeared at state banquets, official visits, national commemorations, and the kind of formal occasions where the world's press trains its cameras and every detail is scrutinized. Over time, those pieces became visually inseparable from her identity as a working royal. They were part of how the palace had, piece by piece, constructed the image of Camilla as someone who belonged in the frame. That is what makes their reported transfer so significant, when objects that have been used to build one person's institutional identity are moved into the custody of another. It is not an administrative tidying. It is a reordering of meaning. And in an institution as symbolically sophisticated as the British royal family, a reordering of meaning is never accidental. According to accounts from those familiar with the situation, this was not a decision made in a single meeting or in a moment of personal frustration. It was the result of a process that had been building quietly for a considerable length of time, fed by questions that royal advisors and palace trustees had been examining with increasing urgency. The core question was one that the royal household periodically must face when it comes to jewels, estates, and other assets that sit at the ambiguous intersection of personal ownership and institutional heritage. Do these pieces belong to the individual who wears them, or do they belong to the crown itself, to the ongoing story of the monarchy regardless of who holds the title at any given moment? For pieces with long royal histories, the answer is rarely simple. Some items in Camilla's collection carry provenance that stretches back across multiple reigns. They were worn by previous queens and queen consorts. They appeared at state occasions that predate Camilla's entry into the royal family by decades. Their identity, in other words, was never entirely hers to begin with. It was loaned to her along with the title. When palace advisors reportedly presented their findings to King Charles, the conclusion they drew was that certain pieces within the collection were so closely tied to the institutional function of the crown that their long-term stewardship needed to align with the monarchy's future direction rather than with the personal comfort of any current holder. For Charles, that conclusion pointed in one direction, toward Catherine. Catherine, Princess of Wales, has spent more than a decade building a public profile that is defined above all else by discipline and by a quality of endurance that the palace prizes. She came into the royal family as a young woman with no background in institutional life, and she has steadily, without drama and without misstep, grown into a figure who is now widely regarded as the monarchy's greatest asset in terms of its future public standing. Her trajectory has not been accidental. It has been the product of enormous personal effort, of choices made carefully over years, of a consistent willingness to subordinate personal preference to institutional requirement. She has shown, repeatedly, that she understands the difference between what the crown asks of the person wearing it and what that person might prefer for themselves. That quality, the willingness to carry weight without complaint, is precisely what the reported transfer of the Brooch collection signals. The palace does not move significant objects into the hands of someone it doubts. The act of entrusting Catherine with pieces that carry complicated history and enormous symbolic weight is itself a statement about the confidence that sits behind the decision. As for the timing, royal observers note that the question of institutional succession planning has taken on a quiet but unmistakable urgency in recent years. Charles came to the throne later in life than any British monarch in modern history. William and Catherine represent not just the next reign, but a reign that many people both inside and outside the palace have already begun to think of as the primary story. Younger, more visible, and carrying none of the historical controversies that surrounded both Charles and Camilla before their marriage. They represent a clean chapter in an institution that has learned, sometimes painfully, how much public goodwill matters. In that context, the timing of this reported decision begins to make a different kind of sense. It is not reactive. It is preparatory. Queen Camilla's position within the royal family has never been entirely straightforward, and the people closest to her understand that better than anyone. Her path from private citizen to queen was long, difficult, and at times genuinely humiliating, in the sense that it required her to absorb public hostility with patience and grace while making herself useful and visible, and eventually almost against the grain of what anyone might have predicted respected. The process of building that respect took years of careful work. It involved the gradual adoption of a public role focused on causes that the palace calculated would be well received. It involved a studied restraint in how she presented herself, a conscious stepping back from controversy, and a willingness to exist in Diana's shadow without challenging it. By the time Charles became king and she became queen consort, there was a real argument to be made that she had completed the rehabilitation the palace had originally mapped out for her. But rehabilitation and authority are not the same thing. Camilla's supporters inside the palace have always understood that her position rested on a particular foundation, the active support and personal loyalty of Charles. Without that, she would have been a far more vulnerable figure. With it, she had been able to establish herself as something that few people would have predicted possible in the years immediately following Diana's death. She had become a recognizable and moderately popular royal figure. The reported transfer of the Brooch collection does not erase that, but it does something that Camilla's supporters are reportedly finding difficult to absorb with equanimity. It draws a visible line between what is personal and what is institutional. It says, in the language the palace uses most fluently, that the objects associated with the crown's ongoing story are moving toward the people who will carry that story forward, and that line, once drawn, changes the way everything around it is read. Sources describe the atmosphere in the royal household, since this decision became known among senior staff, as notably subdued. The palace is an institution populated by people who have built careers on the ability to read institutional signals precisely and to understand what those signals mean for the alignments of power they navigate daily. Those people, according to accounts from insiders, have registered this one clearly. Staff members in Camilla's circle are reported to have received the news with the kind of quiet that precedes something that has not yet been fully processed. There were no outbursts, no visible confrontations, none of the drama that a story of this kind might be expected to generate in a less disciplined environment. What there was instead was a careful, watchful stillness, the kind that settles into a household when everyone understands that a line has been crossed and that nothing will be quite the same on the other side of it. Catherine's team, by contrast, is reported to have handled the news with the same studied composure that has come to define how she operates generally. There was no visible celebration, no sense of triumph communicated through any visible channel. People close to her describe a response characterized by seriousness rather than satisfaction, a recognition that what was being placed in her hands carried responsibilities as significant as the honor. That response, in itself, is worth noting. The palace was watching how both women received the news. And in the world of institutional signaling where this story lives, the manner of a response matters almost as much as the response itself. For King Charles, the reported decision represents something that is worth taking seriously as a personal story, not only as an institutional one. Charles's loyalty to Camilla is not a political calculation. It is a fact about who he is, documented across decades of personal difficulty. He stood beside her when she was perhaps the most disliked figure in British public life. He insisted on her eventual acceptance as queen consort over the quiet but genuine resistance of some voices within the royal establishment. He has spent the years of his reign making clear that she is a genuine partner in the work of the monarchy, not a concession or a compromise. To make a decision that reduces the symbolic footprint of a woman to whom he owes so much personal loyalty is not something that could have been comfortable. And those who know Charles well note that comfort was almost certainly not how he experienced it. What appears to have prevailed, according to the accounts circulating within palace circles, was the sense of institutional responsibility that has defined Charles's understanding of the crown since long before he inherited it. He has spent more years preparing to be king than almost any monarch in British history, and that preparation gave him a framework for thinking about the crown that is genuinely longer in its view than the personal. He has spoken, repeatedly and with evident sincerity, about the monarchy as a trust, something held for future generations rather than enjoyed by the present one. When that framework was applied to the question of where certain pieces of Camilla's collection ultimately belonged, it produced an answer that was institutionally coherent even if it was personally painful. And Charles appears to have accepted that answer, not without difficulty, but without retreating from it. What happens next, in practical terms, is that Catherine becomes the custodian of objects with layered histories and complicated meanings. Every time she wears one of these pieces at a public occasion, it will be read. Royal watchers will note the parallels with earlier occasions when Camilla wore the same piece. Commentary will be written. Comparisons will be drawn. The burden that places on Catherine is not a small one. She is being asked to wear history in a way that honors its earlier chapters without being consumed by them. She is being asked to carry the legacy of a woman who is still alive, still active, and still present in the same institution, and to do so with the kind of grace that neither diminishes Camilla nor diminishes herself. That is an extraordinarily fine line to walk, and the fact that the palace appears confident she can walk it is perhaps the most significant thing about this entire episode. Because what the palace is ultimately doing here, in the careful and indirect way that institutions do things, is naming its future. It is not announcing a succession or publishing a plan. It is moving objects quietly, deliberately, and with full awareness of what the movement means in the direction of the people it trusts to carry the next chapter. There is a version of this story that presents it as personal drama, as a conflict between two women, as a palace intrigue, as evidence of family tensions playing out behind closed doors. That version is not entirely wrong. There are personal dimensions to this that are real and that carry genuine emotional weight for the people involved. But the more significant version of the story is institutional. What the reported decision reveals is a monarchy that is, beneath its visible routines, already thinking carefully about the shape of the next reign. A monarchy that is making quiet preparations for a continuity that it has not yet been called upon to demonstrate. A monarchy that understands, because it has understood this for centuries, that the objects it moves and the people it entrusts them to are among the most honest signals it sends about where it believes it is going. Camilla built something real across the years of her marriage to Charles. The respect she earned was earned, not granted. The role she inhabits is one she has grown into with more grace than many people predicted she would. None of that is being erased by this reported decision. But the institutional future of the crown is not hers to define. It belongs to William and Catherine, and increasingly, the palace is making that visible. The diamonds will be worn again. They will appear at state occasions and official portraits, and the kind of moments that become the visual record of an era. And when they do, they will be telling a story about where the monarchy has placed its confidence. That story has already quietly begun. What do you think this decision reveals about the direction the monarchy is heading? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more analysis of the royal family's behind-the-scenes decisions, make sure you subscribe. We cover the stories that go deeper than the headlines.